Quiero saludar a John Bolton. Él fue el asesor de Seguridad Nacional de los Estados Unidos, una de las personas que trabajó muy de cerca todos los temas de seguridad en el mundo en la administración de Donald Trump. Luego, pues, como ya lo escuchamos a él aquí, salió con algunas diferencias. Pero sorprendió mucho que en una entrevista dijo a un periodista de CNN sobre un intento de golpe en el que fracasó. O sea que Estados Unidos intentó un golpe contra Venezuela. Y esa es la primera pregunta, Ana, y seguimos toda la entrevista en inglés y luego traducimos para aprovechar el tiempo de John Bolton. ¿Nos podrían explicar con mayores detalles cómo fue ese frustrado intento de golpe en Venezuela?
Good morning, Secretary Bolton. Thank you very much for your time today at W Radio. And the first question I want to ask you is in terms of Venezuela. And, there's been a lot of speculation about some comments you've made about a possible coup that you helped orchestrate. And the question would be, how did that failed coup happen in Venezuela, and what was the U.S. involvement in it?
Right. Well, the Venezuelan opposition really was the leading actor right on through, and it was a great tragedy that in the early months of 2019, their effort to overthrow the Maduro dictatorship failed. I just think it's important to be realistic in the United States or anywhere else to discuss what, in fact, people are doing. And it was clearly the declared policy of the United States that Maduro should be replaced by Juan Guaido. We considered him the legitimate president of Venezuela, according to the Venezuelans' own constitution, written by Hugo Chavez during his regime. And as I say, it's a tragedy for the people of Venezuela that they didn't succeed. It was not a coup against the democratic government. It was exactly the opposite. It was trying to help the people regain power.
But, Mr. Bolton, with all our respect, in some weeks, Colombia will have a president, former guerrilla President Gustavo Petro. He has a political project very ubicated on the left. How a country could intervene. This is an intromission of a decision of the people of other country. Colombia decide to have Petro president. In 1 year, the United States decide that Petro is not the president that the people wants in Colombia because we're having a lot of problems. And how can you explain this type of intromissions?
Well, I think the point that I was trying to make was that the U.S., like every other government, acts in its own national self-interest. The government of Colombia does, the government of Russia does, the government of China does, the government of France does. The threat to the United States and to the people of Venezuela by the Maduro regime, bringing in China, bringing in Iran, bringing in Russia, I think was very clear. And I think for the same reason that countries like Iran and North Korea threaten the world by their aspiration to get deliverable nuclear weapons, there are some problems that can only be resolved that way. But it's not people are exaggerating, I think, both what history reveals and what's realistically possible in terms of protecting American interest or protecting the interest of their own countries.
Mr. Bolton, going back to that failed coup in Venezuela in 2019, after months that this happened, there was several reports about how involved was the Trump administration in this coup. And just to be concrete, was the Trump administration aware that this coup was being prepared, was being planned by the opposition in Venezuela prior to it happening?
Yes, absolutely. I think and I've written about it in my book, The Room Where It Happened. I think where the United States can be criticized there was that probably we didn't do enough to help the opposition in Venezuela. I'm sure history will record my impression at the time was that Juan Guaido and his supporters came very, very close to liberating their country. in April of 2019, and it's a tragedy for the people and the lives they're now forced to live under the Maduro dictatorship that it failed. So, as I say, I think the complaint about American behavior was not that we supported the opposition, but that we really did very little. It was organized, led, and really implemented by the people of Venezuela, and I wish we had done more.
But the little that the U.S. was able to do, that the Trump administration was able to do, was there weapons provided? Was there money provided? What type of help specifically was provided by the U.S.?
No. And this is, I mean, it's a fair question, but it's a good example, I think, of how people exaggerate what we're talking about here. We imposed sanctions on the Maduro regime. We froze and turned over foreign government assets that the government of Venezuela held, for example, in the United States, turned it over to Juan Guaido as a legitimate government. So what we did in the international sphere, hoping that the economic pressure would push back the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, and most importantly of all, the Cubans. Because if the Cubans weren't there, I think Maduro would certainly have fallen.
Mr. Bolton, what do you think that Colombia, under the new president, reestablished relations with Nicolás Maduro and the government of Venezuela? What do you think will be the biggest challenge?
Well, the people of Colombia have cast their votes, and they're going to get the president they elected. I think it's a mistake to recognize Maduro. It gives him legitimacy that he doesn't deserve. His regime, top military officials and others, profit now not so much by the sale of Venezuelan oil, but by the sale of illegal drugs, many of which, as you know, come from Colombia into Venezuela for shipment through the Caribbean into the United States. And people in Colombia are certainly far more familiar than I am with the experience they've had with the drug cartels and the revolutionaries in years past. I just hate to see the situation revert to what it was several decades ago for the people of Colombia.
Mr. Bolton from Beijing, China, have your administration ever tried an operation to promote the independence of Taiwan from China mainland?
Look, the position of the U.S. government, I think, during the Trump administration was pretty clear that it didn't support a unilateral declaration of independence by Taiwan. Let me just say, that's not my position. I've thought for over 20 years that Taiwan should just state what the reality is. It is independent of China, and it should be. I think the United States government should grant full diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and I hope that would be coming with a new president after the 2024 election. Taiwan is a democratic country. It's demonstrated huge capacity for individual freedom and economic growth, and I think we should welcome it into the family of industrial democracies and not do, unfortunately, what happened to Hong Kong, return to Chinese control, and as we've just seen in the past few years, liberty really crushed in Hong Kong. I don't think we ought to allow that to happen in Taiwan.
Mr. Bolton, question from Moscow. Not that many people know about American intervention in some countries. You don't think that many countries are now expecting about American actions and more careful about?
No, look, I think the United States doesn't behave in any fashion different than any other country that looks out for its national interest. And I think what a country does is based on its calculation of what it needs to do. If, for example, I felt that the United States was threatened by a nuclear program in a country that was ruled by authoritarians or fanatics, to protect the American people from the potential of nuclear blackmail, I think it's perfectly sensible to think about regime change in a variety of different ways, often through the citizens of the country who also want the regime overthrown.
Mr. Bolton, after the later information, the new details about what did happen in January last year on Capitol Hill, how do you see the judicial situation of Donald Trump?
Well, Well, look, I think January the 6th was a sad day for America. It's really a tragedy what happened. I do hold Trump largely responsible for it, and I think that the hearings that have been going on in Washington, the new information that's coming out, I think are reducing the chances that he can have a successful return to politics. My personal opinion is that he will not run in 2024. He knows he lost in 2020. He's been told that many times, and I think he fears losing in 2024. So since he doesn't want to go down in history as a loser, he'll find a pretext not to run. He may try to become a kingmaker in the 2024 Republican nomination process, but at the end of the day, I don't think he will run for the nomination to be president.
And if it's not be Donald Trump, who do you think will be?
Well, Governor DeSantis of Florida is now in the lead in the polls, but I think Republicans could see as many as 12 or 15 viable candidates seeking the Republican nomination. I think people want to move beyond Donald Trump. They want to see new leaders emerge. The problems that the citizens face in their daily lives, the problem of inflation as the most important. They want to hear from politicians who are going to propose how to solve that problem. Donald Trump is not one of those. All he wants to do is talk about the 2020 election. And I think the American people, most of them already have moved past that, and the rest will hear with increasing speed.
And finally, I have to ask you about the today's situation of President Biden. He is having serious problems in the today's poll, and he insists and he wants to run. But do you think because inflation, economic problems, and because his age, he will run, or will be the time for Kamala?
Well, I don't think President Biden will run for re-election either. I don't think in November of 2024, I don't think either he or Donald Trump's name will be on the ballot in the United States. But I don't think Vice President Harris is a sure winner to get the Democratic Party nomination. I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party are concerned she would be defeated in 2024 and they would lose seats in the House and the Senate and in the governorships and in state races. So I think, much like the Republican side, I think there will be a very hotly contested fight to get the Democratic Party nomination. And it could be in both parties the nominee will be someone who's really not very well known around the world at this point.
Finally, I have a last question because what happened this weekend in the New York Post. They are talking about the computer of Hunter Biden, and there is a lot of information that maybe is connecting Mr. Hunter Biden with some particular business all over the world, and also with Russia. When you were in your agency, did you have any information about Hunter Biden?
No, I didn't, and I was really looking at the problems we were confronting at the time. If Hunter Biden has criminal liability, then the prosecutors ought to look at it. But I think there's a lot of hype in American politics. There may well be something serious here. I'm not saying there's not, but I'd rather leave it to the professionals to look at and let them make their judgments. And at that point, there's more to discuss if it results in criminal prosecution.
Mr. Bolton, thank you very much for your time, and have you a great day.
Well, thank you for having me. You too. Bueno. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Entonces le toca a Alberto a Grace tomar respiración, sí, ¿no?
Terrible, sí.
Tranquila,
sí, porque
Grace.
el acumulado es como el premio que se va a ganar Ana.
Sí, no, es como la crema dental. Entonces, tiene que, para que no explote y no se ahogue, tiene que ir despacito, Ana, despacito. Fuimos por varios temas de los países, pero comenzamos con el tema de la intervención en Venezuela, de la que él habló y lo ratificó. ¿Qué dijo?
Pues Julio, así como usted dice, le pregunta inicialmente cómo fue ese frustrado intento de golpe en Venezuela. Él responde que la oposición venezolana era la que estaba liderando este golpe y para él es una tragedia que en ese 2019 los intentos que hizo la oposición de destronar a Maduro hayan fracasado, porque nos dice que para los Estados Unidos era muy importante que este golpe se diera, porque obviamente Maduro no era reconocido por los Estados Unidos, sino que era reconocido Juan Guaidó. Para ellos, Juan Guaidó era el presidente legítimo para los Estados Unidos, así que es una tragedia para Venezuela que no se haya dado este golpe y que no pudieran ayudar al pueblo venezolano a retomar el poder, porque él dice que el pueblo venezolano perdió el poder bajo el gobierno de Maduro. Le dice Julio en su pregunta que con todo respeto Colombia tendrá un exguerrillero como presidente, un presidente de izquierda, y cómo si un país puede intervenir posteriormente para destronar a ese presidente, cómo se explica esas intromisiones en un país luego de que no le gusta a los Estados Unidos esa elección. Y nos dice que el punto de los Estados Unidos en este sentido es que los gobiernos, sea cual sea, incluido Estados Unidos, actúa según sus intereses. Rusia lo hace, Estados Unidos lo hace, Francia lo hace, todos actúan según sus intereses. Y para los Estados Unidos, Venezuela era una amenaza, ese régimen de Venezuela era una amenaza porque pues estaban allí otros actores como Rusia, Irán, China. Entonces la amenaza para los Estados Unidos es bastante clara y nos dice que las personas no van a exagerar y la historia va a revelar que pues fue un error que Juan Guaidó no haya podido lograr este golpe y que los Estados Unidos no hayan podido hacer más para lograr este golpe, porque lo que hacía los Estados Unidos era proteger sus intereses y de los países interesados. También le pregunta sobre Ana si en 2019 la administración Trump sabía que este golpe se estaba planeando, y él admite que sí, que la administración sabía que este golpe se estaba planeando. Él escribió de hecho eso en su libro y nos dice que pues Estados Unidos debe ser criticado porque no hizo suficiente para apoyar este golpe en Venezuela, porque nos dice que no se le puede criticar por haber apoyado a Guaidó porque era el aliado de los Estados Unidos, sino que más bien es una tragedia para el pueblo de los Estados Unidos que no haya logrado liberarse de Maduro y están obligados ahora a vivir bajo esa dictadura. Así que nos dice que es reprochable para los Estados Unidos que hicieron poco, que no ayudaron lo suficiente para que ese golpe se hiciera realidad. Sobre la ayuda que le dieron, Ana quería precisar si esa ayuda fue con dinero, con armas, y nos dice que no, que eso es una exageración, aunque es una pregunta justa, se está exagerando porque ellos ayudaron con sanciones económicas a Maduro, le quitaron propiedades a Maduro que tenían en el exterior y se lo pasaron al gobierno de Juan Guaidó. Entonces fue más una presión económica para obviamente acabar con esos aliados que tenían como Rusia, China, Irán y Cuba, que estaban en Venezuela y que ayudaron también a que este golpe no se perpetrara. Dice que en especial los cubanos jugaron un papel importante y que gracias a ellos Maduro sigue en el poder. Sobre las relaciones con Colombia y Venezuela, el restablecimiento de relaciones ahora con el gobierno electo de Gustavo Petro, dice que ya las personas en Colombia votaron, eligieron un nuevo presidente, pero es un error para él reconocer a Maduro porque eso le da una legitimidad que no merece, porque ellos no solo se financian del petróleo, sino de drogas ilegales. Es una droga que viene de Colombia, que entra a Venezuela y llega a los Estados Unidos por el Caribe. Así que los colombianos son bastante familiares con esta temática y no quieren regresar al pasado, a esta época de los carteles, de las guerrillas, y no regresar a lo que era Colombia antes. Desde Beijing le pregunta a Alberto sobre Taiwán y si hubo una operación para que Taiwán se independizara de China. Nos dice que la posición de Estados Unidos durante la administración Trump fue clara, de no independencia de Taiwán, no es su posición. Él piensa y ha pensado durante 20 años que Taiwán debe quedarse independiente, que Estados Unidos debe tener relaciones completas con Taiwán y espera que eso pase en 2024. Taiwán para él es un país democrático, ha demostrado sus capacidades económicas, su libertad, y nos dice que con lo que pasó en Hong Kong, que le dio cierto control a China, le da miedo que pase lo mismo en Taiwán. También le preguntan desde Moscú sobre esa intromisión de los Estados Unidos en otros países, y ahora los países deben temer y tener más cuidado de los Estados Unidos. Él considera que Estados Unidos no hace nada diferente que hace otro país, y es luchar y buscar sus propios intereses. Así que nos dice que lo que hizo Estados Unidos son datos y unas calculaciones necesarias para proteger a su propio país, por ejemplo, de una amenaza nuclear. Si creen que hay un líder autoritario, para proteger a Estados Unidos, pues ellos apoyan un cambio de régimen que no solo ellos quieren, sino también los ciudadanos dentro de esos países. También sobre lo que pasó en el Capitolio y la situación judicial del expresidente ahora Donald Trump. Dice que enero 6 es un día muy triste para los Estados Unidos. Es una tragedia lo que pasó. Trump, él espera que asuma su responsabilidad por lo que ocurrió el día de esta revuelta en el Capitolio. Nos dice que toda la información que ha salido en la audiencia está reduciendo el chance de que Donald Trump pueda volver a la política. Nos dice que él no cree que en 2024 se vuelva a lanzar como candidato presidencial republicano, porque en 2020 él sabe que perdió. Le han dicho que perdió en 2020, y en 2024 él teme que va a volver a perder, y no quiere pasar a la historia como ese presidente que perdió las elecciones en 2 ocasiones. Así que él cree que él no va a ser candidato en la presidencia en 2024. Si no es Donald Trump, ¿quién sería? Pues nos dice que DeSantis de la Florida está liderando las encuestas, pero van a haber de 12 a 15 candidatos republicanos buscando esa nominación, porque los republicanos quieren un líder más allá de Trump, quieren el surgimiento de nuevos líderes. Quieren un líder que en verdad vaya a atacar esos problemas de la ciudadanía, como la inflación, y políticos que vayan a resolver eso. Trump no va a resolver eso porque solo habla de las elecciones del pasado, del 2020, y ya los estadounidenses pasaron ese capítulo. Sobre la situación de Biden ahora, los problemas de las encuestas de hoy, él insiste en lanzarse a la presidencia en 2024, muchos problemas de economía, de inflación, y pues si la edad va a ser un problema para esa reelección, o si va a ser Kamala la candidata, le preguntaba Julio. Dice que no cree que Biden vaya a lanzarse en noviembre de 2024, así como Donald Trump tampoco lo hará. Nos dice que la vicepresidenta Harris no cree que sea la ganadora de esa nominación demócrata. Va a haber una nominación muy peleada entre candidatos demócratas, y no cree que vaya a ser Harris esa candidata obvia, porque temen los demócratas también que vaya a perder, y también sillas en el Senado. Ya voy a terminar, Juan Pablo. Le pregunta finalmente...
Está llorando, si está sin aire. Tengo miedo. Agua, por favor.
No la moleste.
Le pregunta finalmente Julio sobre el New York Post, el computador de Hunter Biden.
Tequila, patrón.
Sí, necesito aquí un whisky. Los hielitos, por favor. Gracias.
No, pues, de Taiwán está que llora.
Le pregunta, déjeme terminar, por favor, y después me molestan que me desconcentro. El New York Post y el computador de Hunter Biden, y cómo esa información puede perjudicar al presidente Joe Biden, y nos dice que él no tenía ninguna información al respecto. Él quiere que los expertos analicen y den una información verídica, y dejarle eso a los profesionales para discutir si se debe iniciar un proceso judicial o no.